Hello and a very warm welcome to the Analyst dated 16 December 2025, brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi, wherein we'll be covering the 7 set of current affairs issues which have featured in today's newspaper. The handout of this very discussion has been pinned in the comment section below for a future reference. Beginning with the analysis section, recently the government has proposed the Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission Bill, which is going to replace one of the prominent social security providing act for the rural poor, that is none other than MG Narega. So we'll be discussing that what are the proposed changes under this new bill and what are the issues which are going to arise out of the same. Moving on to the second topic, as recently the Honorable Prime Minister is on a 3-nation tour and on 17th of December, that is tomorrow, he would be visiting Oman. So in this backdrop, we'll try and understand that what are the areas of convergence when it comes to India and Oman and how we can further strengthen our bilateral relations with Oman. Moving on to the simplified section, herein we'll be covering the 5 set of current affairs issues in the most simple manner possible. And wherever possible, we'll be doing the value addition which would be very relevant for your prelims examination. So stay tuned. So now, beginning with the first topic, this particular topic is dealing with the proposed Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission Bill. This particular bill, as the government has proposed, is going to replace one of the prominent livelihood providing scheme, that is MG Narega Act of 2005. This particular topic you can either relate with GS paper 3, issues relating to employment when it comes to Indian economy, or you can also relate it with GS paper 2, wherein we have this topic, government policies and issues arising out of its design. Now the first thing that we need to understand is why the government has proposed this particular bill. Why we are planning to replace the MG Narega scheme that is there. The government has given this reasoning that since we are providing a lot of social welfare benefits under various social welfare schemes, like we are providing toilets under the Swachh Bharat mission, we are providing affordable house under the Awas Yojana, we are providing electricity under the Saubhagya scheme, etc. So because of this various social welfare schemes which the government is providing, due to this, when it comes to the rural areas have witnessed socio-economic transformation. This was the reasoning given by the government itself. And since various rural areas therein, because of the social welfare schemes, we are witnessing socio-economic transformation. That is the reason probably we have one of the provision in the proposed bill wherein the central government is going to decide now that where we are going to provide the livelihood under this proposed bill, okay? Which rural area, wherein this scheme would be implemented, all would be decided by the central government. So probably the central government have this thing in its mind that we are not going to provide livelihood opportunity in all the areas which are categorized as rural. Okay, this could be probably be one reasoning. Second, reasoning which the government has given, that when it comes to MG Narega, therein whatever work was done, that was not very well aligned with the national priorities. But in the proposed bill, whatever work would be provided, that would be associated with the national priorities. Like we would be coming up with work which would be related with ensuring water security, enhancing the climate resilience of the rural areas, etc. So this was the need, what the government has stated, why we are proposing this particular bill. Now let's try and understand that how this proposed bill is different from the previous MG Narega Act that we had. The first and the major change that we have witnessed is with respect to the number of guaranteed wage employment days. So under the MG Narega, if I am an adult member, I belong to a rural household and I am volunteering to do unskilled manual work. So in that case, if I am demanding unskilled manual work, I will be provided with 100 days of guaranteed work. But now this limit has been increased to 125 days under the proposed bill. Then another change that we are going to witness is with respect to the funding pattern. Now, if you talk about MG Narega, therein when it comes to the wages, the entire funding was done by the central government, and when it comes to the material cost, okay, 3/4 of the material cost was borne by the central government. So cumulatively, if you look into, 90% was borne by the central government and 10% was borne by the state governments. But now this funding pattern is going to undergo a shift. Under the proposed bill, the state government would have to bear 40% of the cost of the scheme, and central government would be bearing only 60% of the cost of the bill. Okay, under this new bill. But one thing that you need to keep in mind, this could be relevant from your prelims perspective, provided if this bill get passed, that is when it comes to northeastern states, when it comes to Himalayan states, and when it comes to J&K, the cost ratio would remain the same. Okay, so here 90% would be borne by the central government and 10% by the state governments. But in other states, the funding pattern would be in this format, 40 and 60. 60% by the central government, 40% by the state governments. Then, under the proposed bill, we have introduced a seasonal pause. So, when it comes to MG Narega, throughout the year, if you demand work, you were able to get the work. But in the proposed bill, we have suggested a seasonal pause for 60 days. Now, it is up to the state governments. They would be announcing this 60-day seasonal pause in advance. And why we have introduced this concept of seasonal pause? Just to ensure that there is adequate supply of labor for the farming related activities. Okay, so this 60-day pause would be introduced during the peak agriculture seasons of sowing and harvesting. Okay, so state governments, based on the agroclimatic zones, they can announce this 60-day seasonal pause, and it could be different for different regions also. Okay, based on the agroclimatic zone wherein that region is falling. Then another change is with respect to the approach. In MG Narega, we used to follow a bottom-up approach. Why I am saying bottom-up approach? Because under the MG Narega, what used to happen? The state government, based on the demand, they used to present an annual labor, annual work plan and the labor budget. And this was forwarded to the central government, that is Union Ministry of Rural Development. Now, based on the plans, okay, the work plans which were proposed by the state government, based on that only, the central government used to finalize the fund allocation. But now the things are going to change. Now, it is the central government which would be determining the state-wise normative allocation of funds. And on what parameters it is going to do? It is to be decided by the central government itself. Now, please make note of this thing, that here the normative allocation being done by the central government under the proposed bill is not at all related to the annual work plan proposed by the state government. Everything is decided by the central government. That is why when it comes to the proposed bill, we are saying that it is going with the top-down approach, not a bottom-up approach which we used to see in MG Narega. And another thing that you can see is any expenditure, if it is incurred by the state, is in excess of the normative allocation done by the central government, then this excess spending which the state has incurred is to be borne entirely by the state government. It's not like you have done the additional expenditure and you will be getting it's refunded from the central government. No, this entire additional cost, that entire additional expenditure which the state government has done, has to be borne by the central government only. You are not going to get any refund from the central government per se. And the central government would not only set the normative allocation for the states, it is also going to decide that where we are going to spend this money or where this scheme would be implemented. So section 5 clause 1 of the proposed bill empowers the central government that it is going to notify the rural areas in a state where the scheme will be implemented. So you can see that under the proposed bill, more or less we are taking away the flexibility that we used to witness in the MG Narega scheme, and it is taking away the state autonomy when it comes to implementation of this particular scheme, okay, when it comes to the new bill. So what the experts have pointed out, that because of this proposed bill, we are witnessing a shift from demand-based scheme, that is MG Narega, to supply-driven scheme, okay, wherein everything is decided in a top-down approach. Then when it comes to technological interventions, which we have already introduced to enhance the accountability and transparent implementation of MG Narega, like we used to do biometric attendance of the workers, Aadhaar based payment system were there, geotagging of the worksite was done in order to make sure that whether the work was actually done on that worksite or not. So all these technological interventions we have already introduced in MG Narega to enhance the effective implementation of MG Narega. What is going to change now then? This particular bill is only going to codify this into the law. Okay, it is going to get a statutory backing. That's it. Now, when it comes to the deciding of the work, how we are going to decide the work? Previously, I told you in the MG Narega what used to happen? The state government used to come up with the annual work plan and a labor budget, and that used to be forwarded to the central government, and accordingly the allocation was done. Now things are going to change. Now the work plan would be decided at the Gram Panchayat level. Okay, so as you can see, all work under the new scheme shall be originated from the Viksit Gram Panchayat plan. So we'll be preparing a Gram Panchayat plan. Then these plans would be consolidated at the block level, further to district level, and then to state level, and then they would be aggregated into the Viksit Bharat National Rural Infrastructure Stack. As I told you, now under the proposed bill, what the government is trying to do is, we are trying to ensure that whatever work is we are going to do under the proposed bill, that should be in alignment with the national priorities. Okay, so we are going to make sure that whatever work we are doing, that enhances the water security in the rural areas. We are coming up with core rural infrastructure, that is roads and all. Livelihood related infrastructure is created, and we are able to enhance the climate resilience of our rural areas. Okay, provided we already know that when it comes to the rural areas, they are more prone to extreme climatic events, okay, how they negatively impact the agriculture productivity. And ultimately all these plans would be integrated with PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan in order to basically ensure that whatever work we now will be planning under the proposed bill, that is in alignment with the national priorities. Then we are going to replace the job cards which was provided under the MG Narega scheme. Now we are going to come up with Gramin Rozgar Guarantee Card, and if you want this particular card, you need to submit your name, age, address of the household to the Gram Panchayat, okay, in whose jurisdiction you basically reside, so that you can get the registration done. And a special Gramin Rozgar Guarantee Card would be issued, which would be having a distinct color, as you can see. This would be issued for people who are having some sort of disability, people who are aged above 60 years, and single women, transgender, etc., who actually require work, okay, because of some special needs. And when it comes to this new card that we are going to introduce, that is Gramin Rozgar Guarantee Card, it would be valid only for 3 years. Previously the job cards which were there in the MG Narega, they were valid for 5 years. So this is another change, and this would be renewed after verification. Another change that we have introduced, that is with respect to penalties. So previously if you violated the provisions of the MG Narega Act, penalty was roughly 1,000. Now in the proposed bill, we are increasing this penalty amount to 10,000 rupees. Now these are the major changes that the government has proposed in this particular bill. Now what all issues we are going to witness because of this bill that has been proposed by the government? First and the foremost issue is, because of this particular bill, the idea that we had with respect to MG Narega is a demand driven framework, wherein based on the demand, the state used to prepare the annual work plan, and that was forwarded to the central government, and based on that the allocations were done. But if you go by this particular bill, it is actually moving towards a supply driven scheme, wherein everything is decided at the center. So we are following a top down approach. So the experts have pointed out that since we are moving in the direction of supply driven scheme, this is going to severely impact the states wherein in the last financial year we witnessed higher demand for work under the MG Narega. That is your Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Bihar and Andhra Pradesh. Then why we are saying that it is a top-down approach? Because the normative allocation would be fixed by the central government, and on what parameter it is going to do that, that is also to be decided by the central government. In that respect also, it is not consulting the state government per se. Okay, so it is somewhere going against the idea of cooperative federalism. And as I told you that it is the central government now which is going to decide that where we are going to create the livelihood opportunities under the proposed bill. It is not the state government which is going to decide based on the local scenario. Okay, so it is the union government which is going to notify the rural areas in a state where the scheme will be implemented. Okay, then another problem is because of the change in the funding pattern, this is going to increase the financial burden on the states. See, already because of the GST and GST 2.0 reforms, and since the central government has done away with GST compensation cess, the financial autonomy of the state has been severely impacted. They don't have adequate finances. And when you look at the recommendation given by the finance commissions also, as you can see, these were the recommended share, okay, which the central government has to allocate to the state government out of the total divisible tax pool. But the actual share of the gross tax revenue is quite less as compared to the recommended ones. Secondly, because of the central government increased reliance on cess and surcharge, okay, that is also having an impact on the actual amount of tax being given or being shared with the state governments. Then the state's financial situation is also not in good shape because of the freebie culture that we are witnessing in various states. So experts have pointed out that because of this change in the funding pattern, we can witness the same suboptimal performance that we witnessed with respect to Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, wherein the states were not able to make timely payments of their 50% premium subsidy, which led to suboptimal performance of this particular scheme. And that same could happen with respect to the proposed bill. Then another issue is with respect to the seasonal pause. It is good. It is done with good intention that, okay, because of the seasonal pause, we will be able to make sure that there is adequate availability of labor during the peak agriculture season, that is sowing and harvesting. But don't you think so? Because of this thing, we are witnessing a very shortened window. We will not be able to get the guaranteed employment for 125 days. You look at paddy, the sowing period starts from May and continues till August. Harvesting starts from September, it continues till January. When it comes to wheat, sowing starts from October and continues till January, and harvesting February to June. So, although when it comes to states, they are the one who have been given this particular power that you can notify the 60-day period in advance, okay, wherein will not be providing the livelihood under the proposed bill. But this reduces the window, okay, wherein I can actually get the guaranteed employment for 125 days, okay. As under this proposed bill, we have discussed that how the number of guaranteed wage employment days have been increased from 100 to 125. But even though we have increased the number of guaranteed wage employment, we will not be able to utilize that effectively because of this seasonal pause. So, the experts have pointed out that what we need to do, the central government should come up with limited number of schemes, but they should be substantially financed by the central government, okay. Majority of the funding should not be coming from the state government. And secondly, they should look into the financial autonomy of the states. If you want to realize the idea of cooperative federalism, you should take into account the concerns raised by the states with respect to this particular bill. Okay, let's see how things unfold because the bill has not been passed, it has just been proposed. Let's see whether the government takes into account all these concerns or not. So based on the discussion that we have, I have framed a practice question for you people. So do practice this question. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, recently the Honorable Prime Minister is on a 3-nation tour. So, the Honorable Prime Minister is going to visit Jordan, Ethiopia and Oman. So, tomorrow itself, the Honorable Prime Minister is, supposed to visit Oman. So, in this backdrop, we will try and understand the India-Oman relation. This is relevant from your GS paper 2 perspective, India and its neighborhood relations. Now, let's just understand what are the points of convergence. So, if you look at the history, the various Arab world countries are actually supportive of Pakistan on the issue of Kashmir. But when you talk about Oman, it has maintained a very neutral stance. It has not interfered when it comes to India-Pakistan bilateral relation, and it has always suggested this thing that India and Pakistan should, resolve this issue with respect to Kashmir with mutual dialogue. So it has maintained that neutrality and non-interference in the India and Pakistan relations, which we witness with respect to other Arab world countries. Then, when it comes to India and Oman, we started our diplomatic relations way back in 1955 and we upgraded that to strategic partnership in 2008. When you look at the defense and security engagement, it is one of the important pillars. Why? Because we have a memorandum of understanding on military cooperation which was signed way back in 2005, and Oman is the only Gulf country with which all the 3 wings of India's defense forces hold joint exercises. Then, since 2012 and 13, an Indian naval ship has remained on duty in the Gulf of Oman to carry out anti-piracy operations. And the 2 countries are cooperating in the domain of maritime security, that is to ensure maritime security in the Indian Ocean region. Then, based on the logistic agreement with respect to Duqm port in Oman, as you can see in this picture as well, which was signed way back in 2018, this is providing basing facility, operation turnout and other logistic facility to Indian Navy. Okay, so when it comes to the docking clearance part, etc. That is done very easily. Then Oman is very strategically located. It is located near the Gulf of Oman, as you can see here, and near the Arabian Sea. Why, from geography point of view, the Oman location is very important from India's perspective? Because when we have good relation with Oman, we can have a direct or discrete watch on the growing Chinese presence in this particular region. Then when it comes to economic and commercial relation, this is another important pillar of India-Oman relation. If you look at bilateral trade, in financial year 2024-25, the bilateral trade was roughly $10.6 billion. And when it comes to FDI also, from Oman to India, that is also very good. If you look at the data from 2000 to 2025, we had the FDI equal to more than $600 million. Then we had Oman India Joint Investment Fund, wherein SBI and Oman Investment Authority, they hold this joint investment fund. Okay, 50-50 partnership is there. And because of this investment fund, we have already got an investment roughly $600 million in India, and another $300 million is expected in future. All right. Then in the recent visit, the experts have pointed out that India-Oman Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement would likely be signed. What is SEPA? In SEPA, the countries don't just have the negotiation with respect to goods, but they also deepen their ties when it comes to services. They have discussions with respect to intellectual property rights and with respect to enhancing the investments also. Okay, so experts have pointed out that it is likely that when the Honorable Prime Minister would be visiting Oman this time, this Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement would be signed. Then if you look at the fintech and digital payments, there also the two countries are collaborating. And in 2022, the Central Bank of Oman signed a landmark MOU with National Payments Corporation of India, wherein we have linked the payment system between the two countries. And the RuPay debit card has been launched in Oman. So as you can see, in various areas, the two countries are collaborating with each other. Now, how we can further strengthen our bilateral ties with Oman? For that, the SEPA needs to be signed soon, okay, so that we can enhance our relation when it comes to the economic domain. Then the two countries can cooperate with each other on the energy front, because both the countries want to reduce their carbon footprint. So in that respect, the two countries should enhance their collaboration and cooperation with respect to production of green hydrogen, renewable energy and critical minerals to ensure that there is a resilient supply chain when it comes to critical minerals. And in the recent visit, the experts have pointed out that we would be witnessing a discussion with respect to Oman holding strategic petroleum reserves in India. So in energy domain also, the two countries should strengthen their relation. Then when it comes to defense, we should further strengthen our ties when it comes to the defense domain. So in that respect, the experts have pointed out that we should come up with joint production facilities, and the supply of critical weapon platforms such as Tejas, fighter aircraft, naval patrol ships and radar equipment too should be finalized. So in this respect, the agreement should be finalized so that we can further strengthen the defense ties. And it is likely that in the recent visit, we will be witnessing a discussion wherein a deal with Oman to supply the spare parts of Jaguar fighter aircraft to India would be signed soon, okay, in the recent visit itself. And lastly, when it comes to the domain of education, therein the two countries should further strengthen their cooperation in this respect. What we can do, India should sign an agreement with Oman with respect to setting up of offshore campuses of prestigious Indian institutes such as IITs and IIMs, okay, in Oman. This would not just enhance our cooperation in the domain of education, this would also enhance our services exports, okay, in a way, and this would enable us to strengthen our ties. And this is very important, keeping in mind the turbulence that we are witnessing because of the non-finalization of the trade deal with US. So India needs a stable and reliable partner, and that could be Oman. So in this respect, if we want to diversify our markets, it is very important that we finalize the SEPA with Oman. That's all that we have to look into with respect to this particular topic. I have framed a practice question for you people. So based on the discussion that we have, try and attempt this particular question. With this, let's move on to the simplified section. Now, beginning with the simplified section, a write-up has appeared in Indian Express wherein the writer is making a point that when it comes to India, we don't just need health insurance. What we actually need is universal health care. This particular topic you can associate with GS paper 2, issues related to health. Now, recently on 12th of December, we observed the Universal Health Coverage Day, and this year theme was unaffordable health cost, we are sick of it. It basically points towards the growing frustration which the people have with respect to rising financial burden of healthcare. Now, first let's just understand that what is this concept of universal health coverage. So if you go by the definition given by World Health Organization, it simply implies that if a person wants to access primary healthcare, secondary healthcare or tertiary healthcare services, that person should be able to access those healthcare services. Okay. And that person should be able to access these services without any sort of financial hardship. So when you talk about universal healthcare coverage, it basically talks about providing quality healthcare services in the domain of primary, secondary as well as tertiary healthcare. And it also talks about, promoting preventive healthcare, treatment, palliative care as well as rehabilitative care. Okay. And it has been recognized as a universal human right to health. It was reinforced by WHO Alma Ata Declaration of 1978, and this universal health coverage is also a part of Sustainable Development Goals. It has been specifically mentioned under Sustainable Development Goal number 3, specifically target 3.8. Now, when it comes to India, what is the scenario? Whether the burden of healthcare when it comes to individual, is it increasing or it is going down? If you look at out-of-pocket expenditure, that is, apart from what the government is providing, what expenditure I have to do from my own pocket. So if you look at out-of-pocket expenditure as a share of total health expenditure, that has come down significantly. Okay, so from roughly 62 to 63% in 2014-15, we have reduced it to 39 to 40% in 2021-22. But even today, when you look at the poor people, they still have to incur a huge out-of-pocket expenditure. Although we have bring it down, but still, if you look at from the point of rural, poor people, still it is quite high. When it comes to doctor to population ratio, it has improved. Okay, according to WHO, the standard should be 1 doctor per 1000 population, but in India, we have better doctor to population ratio. Now, we have the health insurance scheme, that is Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which basically caters to only secondary and tertiary healthcare services, okay, wherein we are providing the health cover of 5 lakh per family per year, and it is basically providing the healthcare services pertaining to secondary and tertiary healthcare services to 55 crore beneficiaries, okay, which form a significant chunk of the economically vulnerable sections, okay, of the Indian society. But this PMJ do not cater to primary healthcare services, and that is what the writer is pointing out, that the issue when it comes to India is we are providing health insurance, okay, under this PMJ, but we are not improving our primary healthcare, which is very important to realize this idea of universal health coverage. Okay, so we have undermined the primary care approach. And we have basically focused upon the public health insurance instead of focusing upon improving the primary healthcare and wellness centers which are there. And when it comes to this public health insurance schemes also, like this PMJ that is there, because of this, because of poor implementation of these schemes, what is happening? Still the out-of-pocket expenditure when it comes to the individual perspective, it is quite high, okay, because of the different packages which are there for different disease conditions. And evidence also suggests that the patient often have to incur out-of-pocket expenditure. Why? Because the services, certain services are not covered or they are inadequately covered under the health insurance schemes which are there. Or at times the service provider, abuse the provisions of the scheme and they do not provide the adequate health insurance. Then when you look at the international practices, all the countries wherever we have good indicators with respect to health, all those countries have basically focused not just upon the health insurance part, they have put in place a well-structured healthcare. Okay, primary healthcare. So if you look at the East Asian countries also, they have also emphasized upon the primary healthcare. Okay, so they adopted this idea of universal health coverage through an insurance approach, but they have also strengthened their primary and secondary care over the time. And the same thing was done by China. It also have a near universal insurance coverage, okay, which was costing heavily to the public exchequer. So over a period of time, China has also rectified its mistake and it has started investing in strengthening the primary and secondary care, which is very important. Why? Because if you have, primary healthcare services are in good shape, then we will be able to prevent a lot of diseases, so that you don't need the secondary and tertiary healthcare services. So it ensures that the diseases are prevented, there is early detection of the disease, and the follow-up care is also improved. That is the reason a country should focus upon primary and secondary care rather than just focusing upon the public health insurance schemes. Okay. When it comes to India, the Bhore Committee, which was created before independence, it also recommended that the public insurance schemes like we have, that is PMJ, this should not be introduced until we have a robust primary healthcare system in place. Okay, because primary healthcare system is needed to do early detection of the disease, to improve the preventive healthcare. Okay, then there is chronic underfinancing of the primary healthcare, which has resulted in weak public sector provisioning and which has increased our dependence upon the private sector. And this was witnessed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, because of the inequality in access to healthcare services, majority of the people were dependent upon the private sector. Why? Because in the public sector hospitals, the healthcare services were not up to the mark. So quality of healthcare services was not up to the mark. That is the reason people still today rely more on their private sector. And if you go by the National Sample Survey data, it also points out that since we don't have a strong primary healthcare, support, okay, and quality services are not provided in the primary healthcare and wellness center, what happens? According to the National Sample Survey data, there is growing reliance of the poor on increasingly expensive private healthcare services, and this is one of the important contributor to household indebtedness. So ultimately, the writer is pointing out that it is fine that you are coming up with the insurance approach, but you also need to focus upon the primary healthcare centers, okay, because they are the one which would enable us to do early intervention. Because if you have better primary healthcare services and quality services are provided, it would be easy to detect the disease at an early stage and we will be able to go with the idea of preventive healthcare. That's all what this article suggests us. Let's move on to the next topic. Now, the project Suncatcher is in news. This particular topic you can associate with the science and technology section of our prelim syllabus, which has been introduced by Google. So recently the Google CEO Sundar Pichai has announced that the Google company is going to come up with the long-term research initiative, that is Project Suncatcher, which basically intends to put solar powered data centers into space by 2027. Now let's just understand certain prelim pointers with regard to this particular project. So under this project, what we are going to do, we are going to put in place constellation of solar powered satellite which could host data centers in the space, because building data centers on earth is becoming costly because site approvals are not given at an early stage, and they also have negative implications when it comes to the water, when it comes to air. Okay, the idea is more or less similar to how we are going to provide internet services through satellites. So just like satellite constellation under the Starlink project, which is used to provide high-speed internet services, the same idea is being adopted under this project Suncatcher. So we are going to put in place a constellation of solar-powered satellite which could host data centers in space. Then the vision is basically to rely on the solar-powered satellites with free space optical links which would be connecting the nodes with a distributed network. And what is the relevance? When it comes to the AI data centers, they consume enormous amount of energy, and we know sun is one of the major supply of energy. So that is the reason when it comes to the Suncatcher, we are going to put in place solar powered satellites. So we will be able to get the energy from the sun itself. Okay, and this would enable us to reduce the carbon footprint because when you put in place data center, it is going to lead to the issue of e-waste also. And if you don't do scientific disposal of e-waste, it could lead to water pollution, etc. And this is not the idea which has only been proposed by Google. Other billionaires have also come up with the same idea, and Google has just joined the race. So what are data centers? Data centers are basically like a warehouse-like facility which contain computers which have high processing capability, and they store the data. And why it is so that we are demanding data centers? Because of the new AI tools, okay, like ChatGPT, Gemini, etc. For that you need adequate amount of data centers. Now, why are we going with Project Suncatcher? As I told you, sun being the ultimate energy source, it can emit more power than 100 trillion times what the humanity's total electricity production is. And if we are able to put in place the solar powered satellite in the right orbit, the solar panel can be up to 8 times more productive than the data centers which are on the earth. And similar to how the network of satellites in the lower earth orbit beams internet services from the space, the similar idea has been adopted by Google itself. Okay, and herein we are going to use high processing units, that is tensor processing units, which is a Google painted chip which is capable of consuming high volume of data, and the processing time is also very less. Now, why we are moving towards space? Why we can't build data centers on earth? First reason, as I told you, that building data centers on earth, for that you require land, and getting clearances and site approvals is a problem. Then when it comes to data center, the demand is high. Why? Because of the AI advancing that we are witnessing. Okay, AI tools like ChatGPT, Gemini consume large amount of energy, and if you are consuming large amount of energy, and if this energy is not coming from renewable sources, that means that carbon footprint is going to increase in the upcoming time. So in the sun catcher, we are basically using a form of renewable energy, that is sun. So through this project sun catcher, we are going to ensure a fine balance between giving a boost to AI computing and at the same time reducing our carbon footprint by relying on a renewable source of energy, that is sun itself. Okay, and another benefit of this project Suncatcher is why we are moving towards space and why sun, because you need enormous amount of energy to operate these data centers, and sun can provide that major amount of energy that you need, and it can provide 24/7 energy supply. Okay, but there are certain problems also, and this needs to be addressed. Only then this project Suncatcher would be successful. First and the prominent challenge is how do you cool the hardware, because if that constellation of satellites, okay, solar powered satellite, are near the sun, then how you are going to ensure the cooling of the hardware, because data centers, they require cooling also. Okay, because conventional cooling system might not work in the space. Secondly, we have solar flares also, so that can severely damage the electronics, okay, or the solar powered satellites that we are planning to put in place. So you need to address these problems. Only then the Google can make sure that this project Suncatcher is a successful experiment. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, we all must have heard this, that the retail inflation is coming down, but the article which has appeared in Indian Express today points out that this retail inflation do not tell us the real story when it comes to Indian economy. For that, you need to look at the core inflation and the refined core inflation. Let's understand that what are these two terms. Okay, this particular topic you can associate with the economy section of your prelim syllabus. Now let's just first look into that what the article is trying to say. Now recently, when you look at the headline retail inflation, that has rose to 0.71% in November. Okay, and in October, it was an all-time low, that is at 0.25%. Now, when you talk about the retail inflation, it actually takes into account the prices of volatile items, that is your food and the fuel. And why we take into account retail inflation, headline retail inflation? Because this is the one which actually the consumers want to know, because they are very concerned with respect to that what is the trend in the food prices, how much money they have to spend on fuel, etc. Because the expenditure on food and fuel is needed for survival. You need food for nourishment and you need fuel for mobility. And this article is pointing out that the declining trend that we have been witnessing till now when it comes to the headline retail inflation, it is majorly because of the decline in food prices. Alright. But if you actually want to know that what is the inflation scenario when it comes to Indian economy, you need to look into other variables like core inflation as well as refined core inflation. Now, when it comes to core inflation, what we do, we actually exclude these products wherein we see high volatility, that is your food and the fuel. But when it comes to core inflation, what's the problem is, as the economic survey of 21-22 has pointed out, that although we try to exclude these volatile items like fuel and food, but this fuel element somewhere gets incorporated into the core inflation under the transportation and communication parameter that we have. Okay, so somewhere what is happening, the fuel cost is also getting incorporated in the core inflation. So that is the reason economic survey of 21-22 came up with this idea of refined core inflation, wherein we have completely excluded the fuel item. Okay, petrol for vehicle, diesel for vehicle, lubricant, etc. And we have also excluded the food. Okay, so it is this refined core inflation which tells us that what is the movement in the price level if you remove the volatile items wherein we see high volatility in the prices, that is your food and the fuel. And another problem with this core inflation is, one, I told you that under the transportation and the communication heading, what happens, this fuel element somewhere gets incorporated. Another element why we see that the core inflation is inching up, okay, it is 4.4% in November. Why it is so? One is somewhere the fuel element is getting included, and it also includes the demand or the gold and the silver, okay, in which we have witnessed a 50% increase in the prices, as you can see here. Okay, so if you actually want to understand that what is the trend when it comes to the inflation, you need to look at the refined core inflation, wherein we completely eliminate the items wherein we witness high volatility, that is the food and the fuel. Okay, as you can see, which is also referred to be as refined inflation, refined core inflation, or it is also referred to be as core or super core inflation. Okay, when you talk about the super core inflation, it was 2.4% in November. Why it has, such a low level? It is because of the GST 2.0 reforms, wherein we have rationalized the tax slabs. Because of rationalization of tax slabs, what has happened? The prices have come down. So when the prices would come down, obviously the inflation level would be low. And there is weakness in the demand also when it comes to the Indian economy. It is one reason could also be the uncertainty that we have with respect to India-US trade relations also. Okay, because majority of the sectors are dependent upon the US, for example, fishery sector, etc. Now, what more we need to know with respect to this particular topic is consumer price index. It basically measures the changes in the price from the perspective of buyers, okay, like you and me, not from the wholesale level. So we have 4 types of CPI. One is for industrial workers, then we have agricultural laborers, then we have for rural laborers, and all these 3 are basically released by the Labour Bureau. When you talk about CPI rural, urban or combined, this is released by NSO. What are the base year? When it comes to the CPI for industrial worker, the base year is 2016. When it comes to agriculture labor and rural labor, the base year has been changed to 2019. Previously, it was 1986-87. Okay, and when you talk about the CPI urban, rural and combined, currently the base year is 2012, but the government has proposed that we would be shifting this base year to 2024. However, the new CPI series with having this as base year has not been released till now. Okay. When it comes to CPI combined, when we talk about the inflation targeting, which is the inflation parameter which RBI or the MPC takes into account? It is the CPI combined. Okay. Previously, the RBI used to use WPI, but now after we have put in place the flexible inflation targeting mechanism, the Monetary Policy Committee actually takes into account the CPI combined to decide that what should be the policy rates. Now, based on this, we have a PYQ. So, do let me know the answer to this particular question, because more or less I have given you the hint. With this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, recently, the NSO has come up with the Periodic Labour Force Survey report. This particular topic, again, you can associate with the prelims section economy part. Now before we look into that what the survey has suggested, let's just have a brief discussion with respect to the concept that we are going to referring to in this article. First is labor force. What do we mean by labor force? It basically takes into account the people who are already employed plus the people who are searching for jobs and who are ready to work at the prevailing wages. You people who are UPSC aspirants, you are not a part of the labor force because you are not ready, you are not willing to work at the prevailing wage rate. Okay, so labor force basically includes the people who are already employed or the people who are searching for job and are ready to work at the prevailing wage rate. Now when I say labor force participation rate, it basically takes into account the total labor force. As you can see, people employed and unemployed people who are ready to work at the prevailing wages, but they are then also not able to get the job, and it is to be divided by the working age population. Okay, into 100. When I talk about worker population ratio, as the name itself suggests, the people who are already employed divided by the total population of the country. When I talk about unemployment rate, it basically tells us that what is the percentage of the people who are unemployed. Okay, so how do you get this unemployed thing? Labor force minus the people who are working already or who are employed. Okay, this gives you the number of people who are unemployed and you have to divide it with the labor force into 100, and that's how you get the unemployment rate. Some other concept that you will be hearing is usual principal status. So when we have to know that whether the person was employed or unemployed, we use usual principal status. So what is this? Herein the reference period is of 1 year and we'll be looking into that whether that person was employed for the majority part of the year or not. So basically whether that person was employed for more than 183 days in that year or not. Here we are not taking into account the hours of work, we are only seeing that whether that person was employed for the majority of the period, that is 1 year or not. Then we have current weekly status. So what we do here, the reference period will be of a week, that is 7 days, and we will be looking that whether the person was employed for at least 1 hour in those 7 days or not. One improved version is current daily status. So what we look into, again the reference period would be of 7 days only, and here we will say that the person is employed only and only if that person has worked for at least 1 hour on every day. Okay, that is current daily status. Now what the article has suggested and what this the survey has suggested, that when it comes to unemployment rate in India, it has declined to 4.7% when it comes to November, and it is lowest since April. In April, the unemployment rate was 5.1%. When you talk about the periodic labor force survey, it is actually conducted by the National Statistical Office, which basically functions under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Overall, if you look at the labor force participation rate, obviously it would improve because the unemployment rate has come down. Okay, and what we have witnessed is the LFPR has risen primarily in the rural areas. So in rural areas, the labor force participation rate has increased, while the urban areas, the labor force participation rate has decreased marginally. And what is the scenario with females? So the female labor force participation rate has improved, and similar situation we are witnessing in female participation rate. It has improved, immensely in rural areas, but when it comes to the urban female labor force participation rate, it is relatively stable. It has not increased, but it has remained stable. And when you talk about the worker population ratio, obviously it would increase because unemployment is coming down, labor force participation rate is improving, so worker population ratio has also improved, and again this increases primarily in the rural areas. Urban areas, again the worker to population ratio has remained largely stable. So what we can conclude is majorly the unemployment level has gone down in the rural areas. In urban areas, the change is not that much significant. Okay, so because of that, the labor force participation rate has increased immensely in the rural areas, but in urban areas it has actually gone down marginally. When you talk about females, in case of females also, the labor force participation rate has improved, and the improvement is majorly in the rural areas and not majorly in the urban areas. When you talk about worker population ratio, again it has improved because unemployment has come down, and again the improvement is majorly in the rural areas. Now let's just note down certain prelim pointers with regard to this survey. So it is conducted by NSO, and this functions under Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So in January 2025, we brought certain changes under this periodic labor force survey. So what were the changes that we introduced in January 2025? So availability of key employment and unemployment data on a monthly basis would be available for both rural as well as urban areas. Okay, when it comes to current weekly status, what did we discuss when it comes to current weekly status? That we have to look into that in the past 7 days whether that person was employed for at least 1 hour or not. Then quarterly estimates would be provided with respect to rural areas. Previously this quarterly estimates were provided only for urban areas, but now it would be provided for both rural as well as urban area. Quarterly estimates basically means the data for 4 months. Okay. Then we have enhanced the sample size. So now sample size has been increased to 2.65 times than what we has previously, and now we are taking into account various other details also with respect to education, the land possessed, land leased out, household usual monthly income from rent, pension, interest, remittances are now being covered. So these are the changes that we have introduced under the PLFS. Okay, that's all that we need to know with regard to this particular topic. Let's move on to the next one. Now, as we discussed in the second analysis topic, that Honorable Prime Minister is on a 3-nation visit. Okay, so in that respect, he has arrived at Jordan. Okay, this particular topic you can associate with the prelims syllabus, that is places in news. So this full-fledged bilateral visit to Jordan is taking place after 37 years. And this visit coincides with the 75th anniversary of establishment of diplomatic relations between India and Jordan. So as I told you, firstly, the Honorable Prime Minister would be visiting Jordan, then he will be going to Oman and then to Ethiopia. So when he will be in Jordan, he will be having a one-to-one conversation with the King Abdullah II Ibn al-Hussein. And then the Honorable Prime Minister, if the time allows, would be visiting Petra, which is a historic city, okay, which talks about the Asian trade linkages which Jordan had with India previously. And one thing that you need to make note of is when it comes to Jordan, New Delhi is Jordan's 3rd largest trading partner. Now let's just look into certain prelim facts with regard to Jordan. So it is located in the north of Arabian Peninsula in the West Asia. What are the bounding countries? So we have Syria here, we have Iraq in the east, we have Saudi Arabia in south and southeast, and we have Israel, Palestine, or basically the West Bank in the west. What are the water bodies which surround Jordan? So it is basically a Jordan river which basically drains into the Dead Sea. Here we have the Dead Sea. Here you have Gulf of Aqaba. Then when it comes to the ports, so we have Al-Aqaba here, as you can see. It is the only port of Jordan which is located on the southwestern part of the country along the coast of Gulf of Aqaba. The capital city is Amman. Natural resources, so when it comes to Jordan, it has phosphates, potash and shale oil. And one more thing that you need to make note of is Jordan is one of the major supplier of phosphates and potash to India. So that's all that we need to know in today's analyst. Quiz would be coming right up next. So don't forget to practice the quiz and check your knowledge. Till then, keep smiling, keep learning. Have a great day all of you.